Can Kimi Antonelli sustain his title charge against George Russell? Or, as we've seen many times in the past, will his strong start to the season fizzle out and he'll end up losing the world title to his teammate? First, I want to go into what it is that makes Kimi so fast and what are his current weaknesses. What are the things that George has over him and what are the things that Kimi has over George? In 2025, despite being his first season, Kimi was visibly exceptional in slow speed corners. He seemed to be as good, if not better than George when it came to slow speed. However, George pummeled him in high speed and medium speed corners. This year, is that still the case, or has Kimi made a step? For me, a very telling bit of information came after the Chinese Grand Prix, when Pete Bonington, his race engineer, was giving an interview to Sky Sports. He was saying that when they look at the balance traces, he doesn't know how Kimi is able to keep the car so neutral, yet it's on the point of pivoting on its own axis. What does this mean? Well, it means he's essentially not required, or he doesn't need to overload the tyres. He doesn't need to overload the car to get it to rotate. And that's a trait we've seen in the greats of the past. Schumacher, Hamilton, Verstappen, they all have this ability, and Kimi seems to be one of them. His weakness against George is in medium and high speed when there's less load transfer required and it's all about momentum. That's something that Kimi struggled with in 2025. However, is that still the case in 2026? If we look at the Japanese Grand Prix, Kimi was exceptional in the high speed, particularly in Spoon. He was by far the fastest driver in that corner. So, by the looks of it, it seems like he's made a step in those corners. So, George, I think it's fair to say, will have his work cut out if Kimi has indeed made a step. A world championship is not won on speed alone. There are many other factors, and something I think Kimi needs to work on is his race starts. If we remember in Japan, even though he qualified on pole, by the end of lap 1 he was behind George. So, his devastating one-lap speed, his overall pace from that weekend was thrown away on lap 1 and he was having to do a comeback drive. And you can argue without the safety car, George probably would have finished ahead of him. So if Kimi wants to fight for this title, he needs to have better starts because every weekend he can't count on the safety car coming out to give him track position. Another area he probably needs to work on is wheel-to-wheel. I think last year, it's fair to say it wasn't his strong suit. A few clumsy mistakes. I'm thinking about Austria on lap 1, Zandvoort when he drove into Charles, and Brazil on the safety car restart. I don't think that was a particularly strong point for Kimi last year. And this year, with the car advantage they've currently got, he cannot afford to make any of those mistakes. He needs to be a little bit more patient and use the pace advantage of his car. On weekends where he's not as fast as George, in particular, this needs to be his mindset. He can't be impatient. Sometimes it's better to take the points than risk it all going for the win, and I think that's the approach Kimi needs to take. When George is faster, finish second. And if he's faster, don't be impatient. Use the pace of the car to win the Grand Prix. Now, what about George himself? Obviously, George is a top quality driver. I think 2025 was the best he'd ever driven in F1, and he has eradicated the silly mistakes that he was often making in 2023. So, on paper, George should be the favourite for the title. However, at the minute, it's not quite gone his way. Australia, he did get the win. However, China and Japan, it didn't go his way. In China, he was quite unlucky in qualifying, it must be said, when he did look like the faster driver. However, in Japan, he was significantly off Kimi's pace all weekend. So, going forward, what does George need to do? Well, he needs to stamp his authority, close everything off and just focus on himself, be more ruthless. I feel like this year, a big weakness we've seen in George is the way he's picking and choosing his overtakes. He's going for moves when he probably shouldn't be going for them and getting done on the battery and the overtake mode. In Australia, for example, he went for moves against Charles that he probably should have just bided his time a little bit more. And in Japan, he was going for moves at the last chicane and just getting repassed into turn 1. So I think George needs to be a little bit smarter when it comes to his battery management and his overtaking. But all in all, I think Kimi versus George should be a close fight. It's not going to be domination either way. Kimi is one of the most talented drivers on the field, and George is already established to be one of the very best. So whichever way it goes, I'm sure the world champion will be the correct one. The big caveat to all of this is development. How long will Mercedes' current pace advantage last? If Mercedes do end up closer to the pack, closer to Ferrari, by the end of the season, then this early phase is going to be even more critical. Both Hamilton and Leclerc are very punchy, wheel to wheel, especially as we saw in China, as we saw in Australia, as we saw in Japan. They are not afraid to take the fight to faster cars. So if by the end of the season they're in a position to fight for actual wins against Mercedes, and both Mercedes drivers need to get their act together now. Let me know in the comments what you think about Kimi Antonelli. Is it still too early for him to fight for a title, or will he maintain the good form he's shown at the start of the season?